Okay, well, may not be just the most riveting or sexy topic, but somebody or other mentioned, I know Gail mentioned Vectorworks settings, particularly with respect to performance. And I know it's also come up like on discussion boards and so forth. So I just thought this would be a good time to revisit that. And along the way, we'll touch on some other topics. But I'm sharing my screen, and what you're seeing is all of the preference panes from 2020. So, you know, I can zoom in, and you can sort of, this should all be pretty, you know, familiar to everybody. This is what they all look like. And there's 7 of them for 2020. In 2021, there are 9 of them, and they've been reorganized, and they look like this. So I thought I would go through these. When I teach like a 2-day Vectorworks class, this is usually where I start, is I go through all of these settings. And what I've found over the years is that most of us sort of adjust these once or twice and then promptly forget about it for, you know, versions and versions and versions. And along the way, new settings creep in, other ones change. And there's actually a reason for them to be the way they are. So without too much ado, I'll just go ahead and go through these, like I said. So, and then, yeah, it looks like everybody's muted since we're recording. That'd be great, of course, unless you have a question, but you know. So the first thing you'll notice is that they have, Vectorworks have reorganized how the preferences are laid out. It's more of the kind of column with the panes on the left by title, kind of very similar to the way say doors and windows were revamped. The settings dialog box for doors and windows were revamped 1 or 2 versions ago. So this has the added benefit of having a more consistent user interface for people. And also some of these have a lot of real estate to them. And so presumably this offers them some room to add features and so forth. So anyway, so with the edit pane, there's going through these, you've got enable click drag drawing, and you've got the opposite of that, which is not click drag drawing. And there's no real magic to that, right? Click drag drawing is I hold down the mouse button, I drag, and then I release, and then you get the line. Whereas if I don't have that enabled, then what I can do is I can click and hold and then move my cursor around and then click again. So I could click and go off and, you know, get a cup of coffee, have a sip, and then come back and click and finish the drawing operation. So I have to say that procedurally, ergonomically, whatever, click is probably, quote, superior, but it's not what I've been doing for years, and so I don't have that selected that way, but, you know, of course, you can as well. The other advantage of having click drag drawing disabled is it allows you to start a drawing operation. Here, I'll activate the line tool, right? And then move on over to your snaps and change your snaps on the fly, and then finish your operation with a different set of snaps. Well, I mean, why would you want to do that? Well, okay, let's see. Let's draw a rectangle and a circle. And make it like that. Come on. There we go. I'll give that no fill. And so let's say that I wanted to draw a line that started at the intersection of the circle and the edge of that rectangle, right? So if I have my object intersection snap turned on, that's this one over here, snap to intersection, right? Then I can snap that. But you can see that I'm also, it's very easy for me to grab either the top left of this rectangle or the bottom of that circle. Now I could hit the zoom loop and zoom in, right? So that's Z for zoom loop, or escape to get out. But, you know, zooming in and out is a bit of a slowdown. So if I have the object snap turned off, right, then I can snap to that intersection and I will not snap to these corners. So great, I've got my object snap turned off so that I can snap to the intersection that I want. Only now I want this line to end up at the end point of this other line over here. Whoops, I don't have a snap for that because I've turned it off. So if I'm just doing click, click, then it's pretty easy for me to go and turn that on and then finish my operation, right? I could even make it just a little bit more dastardly and put an intersection real close to this. So now to start this drawing operation, I want intersect snaps on, and I want my object snap off. But to finish the operation, I don't want that intersection. So I want that off, and I want my object snap on. So there we go, we can finish it. So that's kind of the benefit of, another benefit of click drawing, again, which I don't do, because you can change your snaps without having to worry about inadvertently dropping your line, right? Now, Vectorworks has actually improved this in recent years. And so now, even with click, right, I hope I'm not wrong about this. I think I should be able to, nope, see, I tried to change my snap and I dropped the line. That's click drag, I'm sorry. So as a click dragger, I should get a t-shirt for that. As a click dragger, what I do is I rely on the keyboard shortcuts for my snaps. So I can't really demonstrate this to you over Zoom, but your QWERTY keyboard maps onto these snaps. So the grid snap corresponds to the A key, and then the snap to angle is the S, and then the D, and then the F. And so if you start with the letter A and work your way right across the keyboard, that starts with the grid snap working your way down. And then Q is your snap to object, and then WER, the next four keys going left to right on your keyboard, are top to bottom. So, you know, one way of doing it would be to like rotate your keyboard 90 degrees, and then you could sort of map it visually onto your snaps. If I did that, yeah, I'm on a laptop, so I would just be rotating the camera too. So I'm not going to do that. And then unfortunately, just reorganizing the order of the snap constraint doesn't really help, because now the order doesn't map to the keyboard if I just change it to a 4x2 instead of a 2x4. So long story short, what I highly recommend is that everybody start practicing these ASDF, QWER keyboard shortcuts, and there are no modifier keys as you're drafting. So now I want to go ahead and turn off my my object snap and turn on my intersect snap, and then here I'll just toggle those and snap to that. So I'm doing that with my left hand, which you can't see, this one over here, while I'm mousing with this hand over there. So, boy, we got way off topic, but that's a good thing, just talking about it, the very first preference in the edit pane, the enable click drag draw. So in other words, these seem like really innocuous kind of preferences, but they actually have some ramifications that are, you know, can be significant to your drafting, modeling, productivity, and the time that you spend. Okay, displaying 8 reshape handles looks something like this, right? If I grab this rectangle, then I get 8, right? If I turn that off, then I just get 4. And what that means is that I can just grab that corner and reshape it, no worries, right? But I cannot reshape without one of these little blue control points. I can't reshape from the midpoints. So I'm not exactly sure why you wouldn't want 8, because 8 is arithmetically twice as good as 4. But anyway, that's what that does. I always have 8 on. If I duplicate something, I'm going to hit Command D and duplicate this rectangle. Apparently nothing happened. But if I drag this rectangle away, you can see that there's a rectangle that's already there under it. In other words, I duplicated the rectangle, but it didn't go anywhere. So if I offset my duplications, then when I duplicate this rectangle, you can see that the new rectangle is up and to the right slightly from the original rectangle. Up and to the right, just like in the Seinfeld episode. So that's kind of nice that I can see now that there's a difference between my duplicate and my original. However, the distance by which it shifts up and to the right is based on the number of pixels. So it's not a real world dimension, or at least it's not a rational dimension that you could predict. It's all dependent on the pixel density of your monitor and the scale that you're at and how far you're zoomed in and so on and so forth. So I have no idea. I'll draw a little line here. Yeah, so that's 1 foot, 4.971 inches on the diagonal. And if I pan back and duplicate, well, that's consistent at least. But since typically after I duplicate something, I'm going to want it to be some set distance away. So I'll take a wall, I'll duplicate it, and then I'll move the duplicate exactly 5 feet to the right or to the left or whatever. I don't like this sort of amorphous distance between them. So I always have my offset duplications turned off. And that way, my duplicate has an exact relationship to the original. That is, it's coincident with it. Now, incidentally, if you are concerned that you've been duplicating things a lot and that you've got all these extra objects sort of stacked on top of each other, a really great fix for that is every once in a while to go to your Tools and Purge menu, and you can see that there's a coincident duplicate object purge. So you can purge objects that are doubled up from this command over here. You can deselect everything else and just purge all your doubled up objects, which you can see I don't have any. But now if I duplicate this and I go back to purge, you see I've got 2 of them. So I could just go ahead and purge that, and that would get rid of the duplicates. All right, so no offset duplications. Auto join walls. So auto join walls is really a terrific feature, except when it's not. What that does is I'm just going to draw an unstyled wall here. Let me zoom in so we can see it better. All right. Here's an unstyled wall, and here's another wall, and I can go ahead and move it. And so with auto join off, what happens is that these don't join. But now if I have auto join turned on, and I have a nice perpendicular connection there, look at that, they nicely joined, which is, saves me having to go and do a join command of one wall to the other to get the same result. So auto join in many cases is fantastic because it allows me to save myself that step. Moreover, in the selection tool, the last mode over here is your connected wall mode. And what that does is when you move a wall that's connected to another wall and drag it, that other wall will stay connected to it and will shift accordingly. Notice that the wall that wasn't joined didn't meet up like that, right? It didn't follow along. So that's another great thing about auto join. However, there are times when auto join is not useful, right? Like I don't want walls to join to each other. I want my walls to be independent. And so in that case, you know, I would want to turn it back off. So what I recommend is that we take another little slight scenic route here in our discussion today, and look at all of our shortcuts. So over here on our display bar, right, you can see that there's this little triangular disclosure widget on the bottom right. And some of you may have a bunch of these little icons here, and some of you may have none whatsoever, and may have just simply ignored this little disclosure triangle. So these are a variety of document and Vectorworks preferences shortcuts that you can add an icon for in this bar. So here's auto join walls. So I'm going to click on that, and bang, that little icon is now there. And so now I can toggle that off and on at will without having to take the extra step of hitting Command, comma, going to my Vectorworks preferences, or going to the disclosure widget and going to my Vectorworks preferences, or going to Vectorworks and going to the Vectorworks preferences. And so, right, these all get me to the same place, different ways to get there. And so settings that I toggle off and on very frequently, for example, auto join walls, I really should have a little widget for that up there, and that'll be a big time saver. And also it'll be a little mnemonic for me. Oh yeah, I can, you know, hide other objects while in groups, or display other objects while in edit mode, and so forth. So that's the skating on auto join walls. Some of these are less important to me, and I'm not going to spend much time on them. Separate sheet views just means that as you're leafing through your different sheet layers or design layers, Vectorworks takes you back to the last view that you had for that. And if you have that deselected, then as you're leafing through your sheet layers, whatever your current zoom is and position is relative to the sheet, you're going to see that layer after layer. So I like that. I like that off, because towards the end of construction documents, I like to sort of go through all of my layers and just admire all of the, you know, drawing that we've done. Like, wow, that's a lot of work. And so just being able to see like the whole sheet and being able to leaf through it is kind of nice. I'm kind of kidding, but I'm kind of not. Enable mouse wheel zooms. By the way, if you're real attentive and you compare 2021 to 2020, you'll notice that there's a little bit of verbiage tweak on some of these preferences. So enable mouse wheel zooms used to be called, I think, just mouse wheel zooms. So what that does is with your enable mouse wheel zooms, as you you know what? Oh, there we go. I'm using a trackpad right now, not an actual mouse. But if I had a scroll mouse, then with my mouse wheel zooms, I would just, as I was tracking here, let's get the mouse going, fire that puppy up. There we go. All right, so now I have a proper mouse. So with the mouse wheel zooms, I'm just running my finger up along the surface of the mouse, and so I'm using that to scroll in and out. What I find is that over time, there tends to be a bit of a drift, and so I'll get this kind of action where my drawing is like drifting away from my center. And so I tend to turn that off, and the way I like to work is when I'm running my finger over the surface of the mouse, it's panning instead of zooming. And I can use my trackpad and a 2-finger pinch action to zoom, or I can use Command 1 or Command 2, or I can do 2 fingers. No, that doesn't work. No, the pinching thing is what my options are. Command 4, Command 3, right? All these shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts for zooming, or of course just use the zoom tool. But you know, to each his own or her own. If you prefer mouse wheel zooms, Go for it. You're not going to break anything. Allow option click in place duplication. Allows you to do just that, option and click something in order to duplicate it in place, right? What I tend to do is avoid that, but if I really want to duplicate something, I can just hold down the option key and then just drag it, and that'll duplicate it. So option drag. And by the way, that's not just a Vectorworks thing. That's a operating system thing. I'm assuming that there's an equivalent in Windows. On the Mac, option drag will duplicate text or whatever you have highlighted. Otherwise, you may get some stacked duplicates if you have this selected, which is fine. Duplicate link tags with objects. I had to double check. This is a new one that got that snuck in. I thought it might have creeped in 2021, but I think it's earlier than that because I checked 2020 and that preference was already there. So there's perfect example of like why you should look at these preferences from time to time, because this is one where I can think of a few instances where I would have liked to have had made use of this preference. So if I duplicate my link tags with objects, let's go ahead here and find some clean space to work with, and let's get a door going. Come on. So there's a door, right? And then from my DIMS and notes menu, I'll go to my data tag object, and I will choose a door tag, and I'll go ahead and hover over the door, and there it is. I'm at 1/8 inch scale here, which is one that's kind of looking kind of huge. With this setting deselected, yes? Somebody say something? Okay. I'm not seeing any chat queries, so we're good. All right. So with this option deselected, I can just hold down the option key and drag that door and duplicate it, right? And the tag doesn't come with it. With it selected, it duplicates the tag as well, which is nice. Unless it's not, then you might not want to have that option. All right. Edit text horizontally by default. That's pretty straightforward. If I have some rotated text, right. And so if I edit text horizontally by default, whenever I have rotated text, it automatically unrotates it, and that makes it a little bit easier to read, so I don't have to do this. But even if I have this off, and I want to rotate, and I want to edit that text, I can just hit this little blue arrow, little rotation arrow here in the upper right-hand corner. Zoom in, but the arrow is going to stay the same size. Right. And then while I'm editing it, it unrotates, and then when I'm out of the edit mode, then it snaps back into its position. So in other words, you can get this effect on the fly just whenever you edit a text block. 2D conversion resolution, this is one that is a little bit variable, but I think probably most of the time you're going to want to be in the medium to high range. What the 2D conversion resolution is it controls how many straight line segments. If you have an arc, for example, here, let's create one. Create a literal circle. All right, and then I'm going to modify that and convert that to a polygon. It doesn't look very different, but you can see in the object info palette that it has 64 vertices. And the reason for that is that I have high conversion. Okay. Now let me undo that. Now it's still a circle. I'm going to go and change high to low. And then I'm going to go ahead and convert that to a polygon. Wow. No one would believe for a minute that was a circle, right? So that's what that does. You can, you know, 864, it's probably 16 or 32 for the medium, and, you know, 256 for the high, whatever. The thing is a great big circle that you just want a segment of, and you want some straight line segments, but you want it to look still fairly circular, right? You may want very high on that conversion, but a teeny tiny little circle that you want to have like a bazillion little straight line segments, you might want to set that to medium. So as a default, I just go with high, and then just adjust it as I need. For default compression, I can choose JPEGs or PNGs. I think PNGs are generally less lossy than JPEGs. That is to say, you can get good quality without too much, a smaller file size without too much loss of quality. But in some cases, certain images compress better as JPEGs than PNGs. I just go with PNGs. For interactive scaling, it used to be that symbols couldn't be scaled, and then symbols could be scaled, but they could only be scaled through the scale feature of the object info palette, and then they could be scaled just by dragging. And so you can either never allow symbols to scale or always allow them, but you get a warning before they scale or without a warning. I think with a warning is actually a pretty good way to go. I think I'm going to make that an office standard. Okay. Then for your arrow keys, you can switch your active layer or class with the command arrow, and would be clever for me to have a document with lots of, oh, there we go. We've got a few classes. So you can see up here in the upper left-hand corner, none is my default class, right? And if I hold down the command key and I tap through my right arrows, you can see that it is, might be really hard to see with my screen resolution. You can see that it is toggling through my available classes. So now none is my default class, now non-plot, now fills, now dimension, now glazing clear, then back to none. So left and right arrows by default, while I'm holding down the command key, allows me to toggle through my classes. Likewise, the command key with the up and down arrows by default allows me to toggle through my layers. I only have like 2 layers in this document, so that's not very exciting. But when you have a lot of layers, that's kind of nice. So that's a great way to view a bunch of layers very quickly in succession. But you want to be careful about the command left and right arrows in classes particularly, because it's really easy to change your default class, say from none to non-plot without noticing it. And then you're drawing for half an hour, and then you save and you go away and you come back and you open the file the next day and the non-plot class is off. And oh my gosh, where did all that work go? Well, you know, it's there, it's just in the wrong class.
Francois, I have a quick question about that.
Sure.
So when you're toggling through, let's say, classes, does it, in the navigation pane, does it toggle alphabetically down the list, or does it go via the previous class you were just in and the one before that, and the one before that?
It just goes alphabetically by the list.
What about if you're in hierarchical views or non-hierarchical view?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Okay. Thank you.
Hierarchical views are an illusion. Yeah, it just goes down the list alphabetically. For layers, it goes not by alphabetically by the layer name, but it goes by the layer order. Good question. And so, yeah, so you could make it command or shift, or I just go with the default, you know. I think that's the default. I don't know. The arrow key alone will just pan your drawing. Well, that's kind of nice. So let me back up here. All right, so pan left, pan right, go up, go down. That works for me. There we go. Right. And if I want to nudge objects, then that would be the shift and the arrow key. And so if I want to take an object and nudge it by a pixel, right, then it will do that for me. Which gets me to nudging. The problem that I have with nudging is that kind of like the offset duplications, it doesn't really nudge by some real world dimension. It just nudges your wall here by a pixel. And so if you want your walls or anything else that you draw to have some kind of dimensional precision, that just goes all out the window when you nudge. So I just reserve nudging for things that don't need to be dimensioned, like, you know, you've got a bathroom and it's really, really tight and you've got a bunch of notes and dimension in there and there's like a little note, and you might use the nudge command to just, you know, move a key or a note just a little bit in that tight space so that everything is legible. But that's about it. That's all I do with nudging. And then if you show the nudge message on the message bar, then that shows up at the bottom right corner of your screen. And then for moving objects, when you nudge, you can or you can actually move something instead of nudging it, and then you're moving them by a snap grid distance. So that would be, in this case, Shift Command arrow, and I could set my snap grid. Yeah, I got it. So I set my snap grid to say an inch in this case, right? And so let's go ahead and change the coordinate of this lower left-hand corner to 28 feet and minus 137 feet. Okay, there we go. So there it is. And then the keyboard command is Shift Command arrow. So Shift Command, and then I'm going to move it up. And as I move it up, you can see that its delta Y changes from negative 137 feet to negative 136.11, 136.10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Likewise, when I move it to the right, 24.11. These are all negative, so you know I'm number line. So there you go. So if you want to quote nudge things, but you want to move them by an increment of the snap grid, then you're going to want to use that feature here of move objects, right? And you might even, you know, if you're really want to be rigid about it, you could even just disable nudging altogether. That's my aspiration. And so the only way to move things is by some set dimension or by your snap grid. That might drive people crazy. By the way, if you want to move something and you're finding all of your snaps are, you know, kind of getting in the way of your freehand creativity, you can always hold down the tilde key, and notice how all my snaps here have grayed out. I'm holding down the tilde key. That's the one that's to the left of the 1 key on the keyboard. And now I can just move things around willy-nilly, and it's just, you know, wherever I move it, that's where it lands, and there's no snapping or whatever. And that can be useful sometimes. So there we go. That's the edit pane. And hey, we're only a half hour into this, and there's 8 more panes to go. So I think, as usual, I need to pick up the pace. Any questions before we go on?
Yes. How do you distinguish when you were moving the object, you were doing it left and you were doing it up, or, you know, horizontal, vertical? Was that a different distinction of keyboard strokes?
Yeah. So you've got your little 4 keyboard arrows on your keyboard,
oh.
Up and down, left and right. I was, oddly enough, I use the up arrow for up and the down arrow for down.
Got it.
And I guess, like, I think in the old days, some laptops didn't have those keyboards, but probably I would imagine now pretty much every laptop has it if you are using a laptop. Okay, so on your display tab, which is the next tab down, they're showing rulers. I don't show rulers. I find that they're a tremendous waste of time. More importantly, they're a waste of space. So if you show your rulers, there they are. There's your ruler, there's your ruler. And a couple of problems with rulers. One is it gives you this false sense of accuracy because you're kind of using your little yellow line here to guide yourself, and you think that you're spot on at this 25-foot tick, but you're not. You're not. You're just fooling yourself. For that reason, rulers aren't really, they're good for approximating things, but that's about it. I don't need a ruler for that. And then the other problem with showing rulers is that in the corner, you've got this little crosshair looking icon. And if you're inadvertently grab that and drag it onto your screen, hey, you've just changed your user origin. Isn't that great? Which is fine. There are times when it's appropriate to change your user origin, but they're rare and you should be doing it very deliberately. And so I don't like that there's this thing here that if I inadvertently click on it and drag without even noticing it, my user origin is changed, and it could be weeks before I even notice that. So rulers for Bowden. Showing your internal origin marker, again, this is a Vectorworks pref. So that's this blue circle here. If you ever see it in your drawing and you're like, what is that? Where did that come from? And I can't move it, I can't select it. That's what that is. That's your internal origin. It never prints. This is a Vectorworks preference, so it's applicable to all of your open Vectorworks files. So, you know, you can just toggle that off and on. Sometimes it's helpful to see it. Some people want to see it all the time. Some people want to see it never, you know, whatever works for you. Showed color axes in top plan view, great. Scroll bars, okay, so scroll bars I think are useful. I've got so much zoomage here. Here's my scroll bar. So there's my scroll bar. Some people hate them for the same reason that I dislike rulers, that they just take up real estate. To be honest, I don't use them all that much, so maybe I'll reconsider whether I'm going to keep my scroll bars. Dark background does that. Your background for all your drawings are black, and it automatically flips black and white in your color palette. So what were black lines become white lines, but it doesn't change anything else. So, you know, your line color palette may not work very happily if you switch from one to the other. So just be aware of that. Zooming your line thickness will allow you to scale your line thickness more or less in reality with its actual thickness. That slows your process down a bit, your graphics. Moreover, because most of us are printing at 600 DPI, but even a fairly high resolution monitor isn't anywhere close to that. It's not necessarily 100% accurate, particularly when you zoom way out or zoom way in. So I just rely on pen colors to tell me what the line weight of something is, and I don't worry about zooming the line thickness. Creating text without fill, that's pretty self-explanatory. Showing your parametric constraints, just when you use parametric constraints, it will show them. So, you know, if I have a rectangle and a circle, and well, where is it? Constraints. Maybe here. There we go. Constraint coincident, right? So constrain that to the circle. So now this gives me this little green dot. Whenever I move the rectangle, the circle goes with it. I'm sorry, this dark background is driving me crazy. Whew. All right. So Can you see that little green rectangle, that little green box there? That just tells me I've got a constraint. It doesn't print, right? Why wouldn't you want to know that? Show other objects while in edit modes. Tremendously useful sometimes to see objects when you're inside of a group, for example, or inside of the symbol to see the context of your larger drawing. If you need to reference some geometry that's outside the group or symbol or whatever. Sometimes it's very distracting. And so this is one that's really good to have a keyboard, a little widget shortcut for up here in your toolbar. And that's that one over here, the orange border with the eyeball in it. I'm toggling over that all the time when I'm working. Use vector caching for faster drawing. Yeah. Might increase your RAM needs a little bit. Center on objects after view change. So that just centers on an object that's selected. If you change the view, that's fine. Enabling anti-aliasing. If you've got a really great machine with very good graphics capability, everything will look a little smoother. The edges will be slightly fuzzier, so you don't have that sharp kind of jaggedy pixelated edge. If you have a Retina display, I'm not really sure that it's all that useful, and it is going to give you some a bit of a performance hit. For navigation graphics, which is like panning around and zooming and moving and so forth, by default, I think best performance is what you get out of the box. Best compatibility means best compatibility with your graphics card, which if you have a laptop may not be that great. And so I'm kind of a compromise kind of guy. So good performance and compatibility. But if you're working with very large files and you're finding that like bits of your drawing are just not showing up on screen, you may want to switch, downgrade from best performance to good performance or best compatibility even. Displaying your light objects in wireframe only, I think is preferable to me. So light objects are, well, they're light objects. If I always see them, then I'm going to have all these weird, nerdy little light objects in wireframe view in all of my renderings. Why would I want to see that? If I never display them, then I've got all these mysterious lights and I have no idea where they're coming from. So it seems like only in wireframe, when I don't care whether I see the light object or not, is a good compromise of when to show them. Likewise, 3D loci. A little 3D locus that's sort of out of place can like wreck your rendering. So why would you want to see that? But you don't never want to see it. So only in wireframe is good. And then font mappings, when you're bringing in fonts from other files, whether it's a Vectorworks user who has fonts that you don't have installed or you're importing a DWG or whatever, you can map fonts to other fonts. So, Calibri is our kind of standard, so we do a lot of mapping to Calibri, but anything that's sort of Helvetica-ish gets mapped to Helvetica. And you can change these on the fly, right? So if I decide that I want ARC1 shape files to be Calibri instead of Helvetica, I can do that. And of course, that's only applicable to the machine that I'm working on. Any questions on this one? Thankfully, as we go down the list, there will be some with panes with many fewer options on them. Any questions about display? Okay. I do want to emphasize that these navigation graphics and anti-aliasing and vector caching can have a pretty significant impact on your performance, on your machine's perceived speed. So for session, you can use sound. So if you've got visual acuity problems, then that will give you like a little click or a little ding as an alternative to screen hints that you're going to intersect or snap to something, which is nice if you're working alone or with headphones, but might be very distracting if you're in an open office. Logging your time in program will create a text file that will track the time that you're spending in Vectorworks. Leaving a file open and walking away to go get a cup of coffee still gets logged as time in Vectorworks. So it may not necessarily be an accurate measure of how much time you're productive in Vectorworks. It's just the amount of time that the program is running. You can display your classes in a pop-up menus hierarchically or not. That's sort of a preference. I tend to like to see them all sort of in a list. Running scripts in developer modes is probably really important if you're developing scripts for debugging. But I don't do that. I'm not really a scripter, and very few Vectorworks users are, so most of us are going to leave that off. Maximum number of undos. Boy, this could have a serious performance impact on your work. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that the most, oh, it'll let me go to 300. Wow, that's scary. It used to be that the cap was 200, but the more undos that you have, of course, then the more steps you can backtrack to undo, which is great. But what Vectorworks is doing is it's caching a snapshot of your file for every undo. And so after a while, if you have a whole lot of undos, you're going to have a really significant memory that's allocated to those. Now, it could be that in recent versions, they've improved that, and maybe they just track the changes that you made instead of the whole file. I don't really know for sure, so it might be fun to experiment with that. But generally what I find is setting that to 0 gives you the best performance, but then you use the benefit of multiple undos. But setting it to something that's really high and luxurious, like 100 or 200, just is kind of unworkable in terms of the performance hit. And so I find that somewhere between 10 and 20 undos is probably a good compromise on that. And then there are some things that you can do, like importing a DWG, that cannot be undone with an undo command. And so if you issue undo warnings, Vectorworks will warn you when you're about to do that, so you can stop what you're doing, save, and then do the action. And then if it turns out that it was a catastrophically bad choice, then what you could do is simply revert to save as an alternative to undo. View changes, that is to say, panning, zooming, changing visible layers, all of those can be counted as actions that Vectorworks can undo. But of course, then your burn rate through your undo is a lot faster because you probably do a lot more panning and zooming than you think you do. And so one option is to individually count each one of those view changes as an action to be undone. And then you're going to burn through all of your undos very, very quickly. Or you could group all of your similar changes. So if you do a pan, a zoom, and a pan, that's 4 actions individually, but Vectorworks would count that as 3 actions with this setting. So the 2 pans are the same kind of view change, and so those would just count as 1. And then the zoom is a different one. And then pan, even though you did a pan, it's now been interrupted with a zoom, so that would be your 3rd one, right? Grouping all view changes would mean if you draw a line, pan, pan, zoom, and then draw another line, right? That would just be 2 actions, drawing one line and drawing the other line, and it would ignore, it would treat, I'm sorry, that would be 3, line, all your view changes, and then line. And then never counts your view changes as an action that can be undone. And that's what I do because I want to hoard my undos as much as possible. I want to have as few undos as I can to improve performance. And then what I can do is just use these browser buttons front and back to as an alternative to undoing. So I recommend grouping all your view changes or never. You know, if you have really fantastic performing machine, then you can group similar view changes, and individually is just, that's just decadent. Automatically append file extensions if you want to see .vwx or whatever. Enable Vectorworks libraries. That allows you to have all of the content libraries that ship with Vectorworks automatically accessible. You would really only disable that if you had a really large office and you had very strict kind of drafting protocols that you wanted to enforce, and there were rules in the office about not using standard content, but only using sanctioned office content. And while I definitely have those tendencies, that's a little extreme even for me. So I say, hey, enable those libraries. Enable your premium libraries, so what used to be called Vectorworks Service Select, and I think is now called something else. Again, you've got all this content, you're paying for it. Why not make it accessible? Unless you have a good reason not to. Create a new document on startup. Just means whenever you start up Vectorworks, it automatically creates a blank document. Otherwise, it doesn't. Change your active layer for similar object creation. When you create similar objects with that command, it will change the active layer to the layer that the original object was on. So for example, if you have show snap modify other layers and you're in one active layer, but you can see and modify another, and you select an object on that other layer, then it'll change your active layer. Way more explanation than, it's actually simpler than it sounds. Use local help, enable macOS restore Windows functionality, and so forth. Checking for updates, weekly, whatever, crash reporting, okay. Palette margins, left, right, both. I like my palettes on the left, and I like to maximize my real estate. I don't like none, because then the drawing area slips under the palette, and then there's stuff hidden there that I don't know about. So this is how I do it, but do however you're most comfortable with, certainly. And then for serial numbers, if you have that, if you click on that button, then it'll show all the serial numbers that you have assigned to you. So if you have multiple users, people are using, different people using the same workstation, you can add serial numbers and so forth. Reset save settings, that's really important. So every once in a while, you will have a dialog box that will come up when you do a command. So I did one a short while ago, you may have noticed, where I activated the snap to grid, and I got a dialog box that said, did you know that blah, 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 you could activate this with a certain keyboard shortcut or whatever. And I hit the check box, don't show this to me again, and hit OK. And so now it's never going to show that dialog box to me ever again until Vectorworks 2022 comes out. And so there's all sorts of things where it's like, always do the selected actions. I can click on that, and it will take that as a default, and it will never give me that option again. Most of the time, that's good because it's something I already know. But sometimes I actually am too hasty when I click on that. And so you can restore all of that, but it just restores them all indiscriminately. So there you go. All right, 3D. So if we go to, if we look at 3D prefs in, there we go. I'm going to move over here. If we look at 3D prefs in 2020, there's a 3D rotation rendering, detailed responsive, and a retained rendering model, never or always. If you look at your preferences in 2021, those options are gone. They no longer exist. I strongly suspect that the reason for that is because of the VGM cache, that basically Vectorworks performance has improved, where these kinds of dialing down of your capabilities is not necessary in order to make the model work. Not in your Vectorworks preferences, but in your documents preferences, right? there's a new setting in 2021. This is the only new setting that I've noticed. Save VGM graphics cache. And VGM is your Vectorworks graphics module. It's basically all the parts of the program that have your graphics look great and perform quickly. And so when you have that selected, what that means is some of the graphics information for each of your individual files, because this is a document preference, it's not a Vectorworks preference, is going to be cached in the file. And what that means is that your file is going to be a little bit bigger. I looked at a file, just picked one at random, and I had that selected. I think that is on by default, and the file was about 105 megs. And then I deselected that and saved the file, and it dropped down to about 87 megs. So about a 20% reduction. I mean, it's not huge, but over many, many files, right, that could add up. That's just something to be aware of. Oh, I just noticed that I've got a couple of chats. Where does the log time in program file reside? Gosh, you know, I don't even use that, so I don't know. It probably resides either on your desktop or in your user folder. Zaman, that's a great question. That's a great question is a euphemism for I have no idea. All right. So back to our Vectorworks preferences, right? So I suspect that this is why, I don't know for a fact, but this is why these options have disappeared from the 3D palette of your Vectorworks preferences, because they're no longer needed and they're in some way supplanted by the VGM cache. So 3D conversion resolution, it's kind of like what I was describing for the 2D, but it has to do with 3D things like, you know, spheres, how faceted, when you convert 3D curved geometry to faceted geometry, how faceted does it get? And again, very high in many situations is probably going to be too high, and low is probably going to be too low. So most of the time you'll want to be in medium and high, but depending on the geometry and what your uses are, you may just need to play with that till you get something that you like. Default 3D render mode is wireframe instead of OpenGL. That is the installed default is OpenGL. I like my 3D render modes in wireframe and orthogonal when I snap to a front view, for example. Because usually when I'm snapping to a front view or a side view, it's because I want to draft in 2D. And so being in a perspective in GL is not, in OpenGL is not really my thing most of the time. But using occluded selection and snapping, this is a feature that came out many versions ago. I'm guessing about 5 or 6 now. Maybe not quite that much. Where basically if you have a 3D model, and I think I can demonstrate that. And we'll go to an isometric view. I'll draw a line, and I'll push-pull it. And let's go to an OpenGL. So that is a 3D surface, and I'll go ahead and draw this, and let's go ahead and draw that, or just no. There we go. All right, so if I'm in, if I rotate this and I hide that geometry behind the rectangle, or behind this extruded line, right? And I want to start drawing on the surface, it's not going to let me snap to that rectangle because the line, the extruded line is hiding it. This plane is hiding it from view, and therefore, if I can't see it, I also can't snap to it. But if I turn that off, then suddenly I can, especially if I send this to back, right? Then I should be able to, there you go. You see where I'm starting to be able to snap to some of that geometry there, right? Which if I know it's there, that can be super useful. But if I don't know that that's there, that's like, what's going on? This is very distracting and so forth. So I tend to prefer using occluded selection and snapping. And if I know I've got something back there that I want to snap to, I'll just hold down the B key. That's my X-ray mode. And now with my X-ray mode on, I can snap to things even when my occluded snapping is selected. So I can do this extrusion back here, for example, right? There we go. So in other words, the B key in X-ray mode makes occluded snapping work even better. So for autosave, you have an autosave feature in Vectorworks, and there's a bunch of different ways that can happen. First of all, there's a timer at which Vectorworks autosaves, and my rule of thumb is set the timer to about 50% of, to about twice of what you can tolerate redrawing. So in other words, if your file crashes and you've got to redo some work, how much work can you tolerate having to redo? Like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour? And then have that, because what usually I've found, sort of purely anecdotally, perfect personal experience, your mileage may vary. Personally, I find that if it takes me about an hour to draw something the first time, it takes me about 30 minutes to draw it the second time, because at least half the time that I'm drawing something, I'm thinking about what I'm drawing. Whereas when I'm redoing the work, I've already made all those decisions. So, you know, if I can tolerate 7.5 minutes of time having to redraw something when things crash, which isn't that often, then set it to 15. So 10, 15 minutes. And of course, every time it's saving, Vectorworks is going to slow you down just a teensy tiny bit. So you probably don't want autosave every minute, but you probably don't want it to be 1 hour either. You can ask for a confirmation before it saves. So Vectorworks will prompt you if you want to save. So that's going to be a constant interruption. You definitely want to have that off if this time increment is small. And you can either overwrite the original file, which means you only ever have one file and Vectorworks is automatically saving that file for you, which I do not recommend. Instead, I recommend that you autosave a backup copy. And so every 15 minutes, in my case, Vectorworks is saving a copy of the file, and it's saving it not in the same location as the original file, but I have a Vectorworks backup folder that I keep in one place. So all of my files are backing up to that one folder. So if Vectorworks crashes, I know immediately what folder to go to get to it, the backup file. And then maybe I'd say every 2 backups or every 3 backups. Now here's the thing. If my autosave is set for every 5 minutes and I only have 2 backups, that means that the oldest that my backup file will be per session is 10 minutes old. And so if I want to have older backups, then I may want to have a larger time increment and or more backups to save. Does that make sense? But saving a backup folder in the same location as the original file means that all of your project files, and you might have dozens or scores or hundreds, are each going to have a folder called Vectorworks Backup with a bunch of files in them. And your hard drive is going to bloat, your archiving is going to be a pain, and it's all over the place. So I highly recommend that you set it up this way, where it auto saves a backup copy, and then it saves it in a single place, which, by the way, I don't even bother backing up with my Time Machine backups. That Vectorworks Backup folder is excluded from my Time Machine backup. So let's see. I want to check to see if there are any questions from anybody on this stuff. I'm not seeing any new chat text. Any chat questions? All right, great. I'm going to go back and change that to 3 because you guys have convinced me 2 is not enough. So for interactive, most of this is personal. Showing your full screen cursor if you still miss AutoCAD, you can have that. Full screen cursor. Yeah, there it is. Woohoo. Showing your selection box and your snap box. So your selection box is this outer box here. It's, whoa. Your selection box is that outer box. I don't know if you can see it. It's very faintly gray. And so as I'm getting close to something, it's pre-selected. It's dashed like that. So it shows me when something is selectable. Right? And then my snap box is this inner box right here. And that's sort of how strong is the magnet of my snaps. You can think of it as, do I need to get right on it in order to snap? Or just within that box, it'll snap. And the bigger the snap box, sorry, I got those backwards. The bigger the snap box, right? Then the more things you can snap to and the less precise you have to be in your motions. So that's good. But if you make it too big, then all of a sudden when you have lots of things in your drawing, there's all sorts of things you can snap to, and then you'll be snapping to something you didn't mean to snap to. So again, this is very personal. It has to do with your pointing device. Are you using a mouse, a wheel, a trackpad? Is your, eye-hand coordination very good? What's the resolution of monitor that you're using, and so on and so forth. So animate view transitions. I mean, why wouldn't you? It's like that allows you to go from save view to save view, and it makes these nice little animations. It's a little herky-jerky right now because of Zoom running on this, right? But that's kind of nice. It's also a really nice sort of way to go from save view to save view if you're doing a presentation for a client or whatever. And then your interactive appearance settings, there are a whole lot of these. I'm not going to even talk about them very much at all, but all of these colors that Vectorworks will give you for working planes and reshape handles and page boundaries and so forth, you can customize every single one of these, right? So if you say want your clip cube to be red, but your clip cube edges to be black, right? You could do that. And so now, if I go back to that 3D view, group all that, or select it, right, and then activate my clip cube. Now, hey, look, I've got a little black outline around these instead of the red. Or I could make the red blue, or whatever color I want. So that's what that is. For enable selection highlighting, that means that objects will highlight, and that highlighting will animate. Either it'll stay on or it'll burst. I find this to be visually extremely distracting, but you can give it a try. And then cursor pre-selection highlighting means that your cursor has to linger over an object for a set amount of time before it will highlight to tell you that it is selectable. So for example, if I move my cursor over here, right, it has to, there you go, it just highlighted, and you see that it just took it a moment to highlight that extruded object. In fact, it took it 0.6 seconds, because that's what I have it to. So half a second's probably too long, half a second. And then these are the different kinds of tool highlighting and snapped object highlighting that you can enable or disable. Really, just try them out. User folders, there's all sorts of things that go in your user folder, like your preferences, your custom workspaces and whatnot. it's on the Mac. It's in the library folder, which is generally hidden unless you deliberately reveal it. This is if you're troubleshooting with tech support or you've got some problems with files. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll have you delete your user folder. You don't have to delete it. You can just drag it to your desktop, and then it'll generate a new one. And then this is important because reveal in Finder, this button's super useful. It will immediately take you right to it, and you don't have to, dig into the bowels of your file structure to find it. And then if you're doing work group and project folders, then those can all be linked and removed and revealed in this dialog box. So here are two new panes, Smart Option Displays and Quick Search, that are not in 2020, even in the different format. So you may have noticed that as I was moving around, right, if I sit tight for a minute, and I think I set the delay to 5. There we go. Took a few seconds. Can you see that there's this like ghosted pencil and menu and little house on the bottom right and so forth? So at this point, if I start to move here, I get these floating menus. So here are my basic tools. Here are some some tools that I'm using very frequently. Here are my standard views, left, right, isometric, front, side, front, and so forth. Right. And here's some other wall join edit mode tools. Right. So I can control how long it takes after my mouse is idle. Here it's 5 seconds. First of all, I can turn this off. So if I want to pretend I'm in 2020, I can do that. It's a rough year, man. Who wants to pretend we're in 2020? Or you could set it to after it idles, you can show it with a space bar. You can show it with your middle mouse button, right? So those are some options. So if I don't want to wait the 5 seconds, I can just hit the space bar, and here it is. And I can also control whether I show text and icons, fully expanded. Let's go fully expanded. Oh, goodness, there you go. That's all of them. Or icons and text. So now it tells me view, draw, tool mode, standard views, previous tools. Right, so these are the tool modes for whatever tool that I currently have selected. So if I have a line tool active and I hit that, now my tool modes are going to be the tool modes for a line tool. Right, same thing as shows up here in your tool mode bar. And then I can choose, I can customize this to a very high degree, which I'm not going to get into, but I recommend that you, since this is a new feature in 2021, that you kind of get the hang of it and customize it after you've played around with it for a bit and see what works, what doesn't work for you. Okay. And then, oops. And then quick search is another new feature in 2021, which will allow you to show search filters and command context. And let me just show that to you. So under your tool menu, there's a new command called quick search. At least that's where it is for me. I don't remember if I just added that or Vectorworks added it for me in my custom workspace. So for years and years on the Mac, there's been, under the help menu, there's this search field. And this is not just a Vectorworks thing, this is an any Mac OS thing, where, for example, I can do a search in this search field, and it will give me all the menu items that have the word fit in them. Fit to page area, fit to objects, fit walls to objects, and so forth. Right. But it only works for commands. It doesn't work for tools. And as far as I know, it's Mac only. So Vectorworks has sort of incorporated this idea, but has included it in the application itself. And that's what quick search is. So I go to quick search and I can do a search for fit. And it's the same deal, right? Only now it's letting me search all or just tools or just menus. But if you don't know where the quick search tool is, then you got to go to your help menu and do search for quick and find quick search using quick search. Let's see what happens. Does Vectorworks crash if I do a search for, no, I can't search for quick search inside quick search. Dear me. Anyway, so what I would recommend that you do, since you may not remember where quick search is that you go to Tools and Workspace and edit your workspace. And I've already done it, but I'll show you what I did. And under menus, you see you've got your file, your edit, your view, your modify, all your different menus. And then down here, there's document context and object context. So what document context is, if I right click on the document, I get this pop-up context menu. This has been around for quite a while. And then the object context is if I right click on an object, I get a different context menu that's relevant to the object itself. So in this case, I want the object context menu. So Tools, Workspace, edit my current workspace. And so document context is here. And under, on the left, so this is that workspace, what that looks like. And then on the left are all the menu commands in Vectorworks. So I could just go to Recent Changes, 2021, New Menu Items, and scroll down and find Quick Search, which is right there. And I can just drag it right in here, which is what I did. And then there's also up here at the very top, there's a separator, so I could drag a separator and give it a nice little line break. So that's what I did. So I'll cancel that. And so what I've got now is I can just right click and click on an empty space in my drawing and do a quick search and find under all, fit page 2. Oh no, you can quick search for quick search. Just need to search under menus. It's kind of silly. So there you go. So that's the quick search preference. Well, that's quick search, which we got there talking about preferences. And then just a few other things to mention that, you know, in this little disclosure widget where you can add these icons, you can get to your document and your Vectorworks preferences real easily right there. And got a couple of chat questions. Okay, cool. Yeah, so it's in your tool menu automatically. Okay, cool. Thank you. Thanks, Bill. And Becky, thank you for requesting this this command. That's most of our time, and I've gone through all of the settings. I think the one kind of document setting that I wanted to discuss in terms of document preferences is saving your VGM graphics cache. Saving your viewport cache means that when you save your file, all of your viewports will be rendered and saved. And if you don't save that, then the next time you open your file, all of your viewports, like prospective viewports, will be wireframes. They won't be rendered, but your files will be really much, much smaller. So turning that off temporarily and saving a file that you're about to archive, that you know that project is done and you just need to keep the file, but you don't expect having to open it again, that might be an option to save a little bit of disk space if you care about that. Display the out-of-date border. So that's just the little barber pole candy striping around viewports that shows that they're out of date. That's one that I can be a little compulsive about updating viewports. They don't really need to be updated. So I have that option to toggle that off and on right there. Use layer colors, not my thing. Save your site model cache. Yes, I recommend that. Makes your file a little bigger, but so what? Mesh smoothing angle, mesh smoothing with a crease angle. I think that should be on by default. It isn't, it's off by default, but I think it's super useful to get some nice OpenGL mesh smoothing. It doesn't really significantly impact rendering time at all, and it doesn't make the file any bigger. I'm not really sure why you wouldn't have that on unless you have some sort of rendering style where you deliberately want things to look kind of angular and blocky and, you know, like SketchUp or something. I don't know. Using automatic drawing coordination, yes, for sure. Very useful to have your drawing labels automatically coordinated. That's especially going to be true as with all the new improvements to drawing labels and tags that were made in 2021. Adjusting your flip text just means that when you flip text, it doesn't show up as mirror writing. Crop perspective, for those of us who've been using Vectorworks for a long, long time, it used to be that our perspective views were automatically cropped. And if you miss that kind of little picture frame cropping, you can get it back with this crop perspective. And you can have drop shadows. That's strictly for 2D graphics. Sometimes it's fun. For your dimensions, this is where you would create and edit and manage your custom dimensions or what the dimension standard is for the file. So these are the dimensions that are out of the box, but you can create a custom dimension. And once you create it, then you can edit it, and these are all the different parameters that you can play with to create your own custom dimension. For resolution, this is for rotated text. This is just for screen and bitmap display. And you can set a default raster rendering, i.e. Pixel rendering of 72 dpi or something else for your design layers. Be very careful. When you double this number, you quadruple your rendering time as a rule of thumb. For planar mode, for planar geometry, you know, drawing rectangles on three-dimensional surfaces or so forth, you could never do that or only do that or have a combination of screen plane and working plane, which is what I tend to prefer. And then for plan shadows, if you're doing just plan shadows, which is not true shadow casting, it's just kind of like a drop shadow of plan objects to give it the appearance of casting a shadow. This is where you would control that for a particular file. If you wanted those shadows to have a particular offset or color or opacity. Even show the shadow under the canopy. I don't think so. So on. Well, thanks. You all have been really patient on a very potentially dry topic. I hope it's been useful. Do keep in mind that there's some one of the things that Gail had asked about this particular topic is you know, what affects performance. And I did address some of the viewport performances that settings that you can do. So, for example, in your In your viewports, you're going to want to watch out for turning on planar objects unless you really want them on, turning off classes that don't really need to be on, and then watch out for plumbing fixtures and furniture from libraries that are heavily faceted with a lot of triangulation. And if it's something that you use over and over again, it might be worth it for you to rebuild it as a NURB surface. Those are generally less intensive in terms of rendering times. And then other things like don't put too many light objects and so forth. So got a couple of minutes more if anybody wants to ask any questions.
I have a question. It's this is a general question. So for example, when you're in the document preferences or any of these windows that you're controlling things, there's a wonderful little hint bar at the bottom. When you hover over a particular item, it tells you a little bit more about that item. But I can barely make out the font because it's so small in that hint bar, and I don't see any way to control the size of the font in the hint bar unless you know how to do that.
Are you Mac or PC?
Mac.
Yeah, so depending on the vintage of your Mac, you might have an option if you have a Retina display to change your overall resolution of your screen.
All right.
So if you go to, I'm not sharing that particular thing, but under System Preferences, under Display, go to System Preferences and Displays. You may have, if you have a Retina display, have an option for larger text, default, or more space. Do you have that?
I have a default for display and then scaled.
Yep. So you can go down one notch from default to whatever is between larger text and default, and you can see that it'll give you a little preview. And like on my machine, for example, larger text looks like a 1024 by 640 display. The next one is a 1280 by 800. The next one is a 1440 by 900, and the last one is
that affects my entire computer.
That affects your entire universe, which you may not want to do. So that's one option, right? The other thing you can do, Bill, is as an alternative to that preview text. Are you familiar with what's this?
Not really.
Okay, so under the help menu, there's a command called what's this in Vectorworks.
Mm-hmm.
And if you click on that, you get this little cursor with a question mark.
Oh yes, I am familiar.
And you can click on a tool or a command, and it will. So you can do what's this, and then go to Vectorworks and Preferences, and it will send you over to the online text, online help, and it will take you right to that area, that section of the online help.
Right.
It's not really the same thing as increasing the text size, but as far as I know, there's no way to adjust that.
No,
and then Becky wanted to know, or I'm sorry, Gail wanted to know if there was a way to include box around text. Yeah, Gail, you know, I was thinking a few years ago, I noticed I couldn't do that anymore. And I was wondering, like, did I just dream that up, that I used to be able to do that? So I think the answer is no, unless you just draw a box and then you can do a drop shadow on it. And if I'm wrong, I'd be delighted to be shown otherwise.
Huh. There is.
Well, everybody, thank you so much. This will be recorded, so if you need a link to the recording, just let me know, and look forward to seeing you all next month.
Yay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you,
Be
Francois.
well, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks, Francois.
See you, everybody.